I came across this post on Reddit saying, can you finish this technical test or am I too slow at coding? So this person was rejected for a software engineer with a JavaScript position because they failed the technical test. So the test consisted of two different parts. The first one is simply a to-do application with React and TypeScript. The application has to allow the user to create a new to-do, delete a to-do, search for one, and mark a to-do as completed. Do not put too much effort into the UI, do the minimum so that we can test the application. We appreciate more the logic and the good practices you used for this application than the UI itself. And then the second one is an API CRUD for books with Node and TypeScript, and create an endpoint to search books by author. Remember to validate the payload and handle every possible error with try-catch blocks. Now for this type of technical interviews, you would expect them to give you access to something like Gitpod, which is a cloud environment for developing. So you can set up the databases very easily. You can set up the projects with React and TypeScript in basically a couple of clicks, as they would be evaluating your logic, not really how you set up everything from scratch, especially considering the time limit is 2 hours. Now this person unfortunately had to do everything from scratch. They said, I failed application 2 because in 1 hour and 30 minutes, I only created the Express application. I configured TypeScript, I configured a database with Docker, and I was only able to create one get endpoint. So this is the problem I'm talking about. If you set up everything from scratch, of course you're going to be taking way more time, and they won't be able to evaluate your actual coding abilities. So for this, what I'm going to do is first solve the first application, which I'm going to use Stack Blitz. They have this React TypeScript starter project. So all of these would be in the cloud. I do not have to set up anything myself. And then I'm going to set up everything. So Express and the database. And once I have that, I'm going to actually solve the second application. So I'm going to assume that if someone were to give me this interview challenge, they set up everything for me, either using a cloud environment or setting up a pre-configured repository I can just clone. Okay, so now let us solve the first challenge, which is the to-do application. So for this, what I'm going to do is create a file called types.ts, and here we're going to export a type to-do, and we're going to have an ID of type string, then completed, boolean, and then description, which is going to be of type string. So now we can come here and we can say const to-dos, set to-dos is equal to react.useState, and we import the to-do type. And this is going to be an array, and it is going to be an empty array initially. So now what I'm going to do is just render the to-dos, and I'm going to render an input so that we can create the to-dos. That way we can get immediate feedback on our logic. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say to-dos.map, then get each to-do, and I'm going to render a div. So key is equal to to-do.id, and then I'm going to close this off. And I'm going to render a paragraph, which is going to be the to-do.description. And then we're going to have a checkbox, which will be like the toggle for either completed or uncompleted. So input type is equal to checkbox, and then checked, I believe. And this will be to-do.completed. And we're going to leave this like this, no styling. We're going to keep things simple. And now what I'm going to do is create the logic for creating a to-do. So we're going to have a label, then an input, type text, and then here we're going to say to-do, and then close this label off. So as we can see, we have this, and we should also have a button. So I'm going to wrap this up in a div just for semantics, because in the end, we're not going to be styling this. Then button type is equal to button, and then add, and we can close this off. So now let's create the function for creating a to-do. So what I'm going to do is say function add to-do. We pass in the description, which is of type string, and then we simply set the to-dos to the previous to-dos. We spread them over to create a new array, and we push in this new to-do. Now, what is this new to-do going to be? Well, we're going to have the description to be this one we're passing in. Completed, well, it's going to be false at first, obviously. But what about the ID? Well, for the ID, I'm going to use a CUID2, which is like a UUID. You can look this up. So we can say npm install. So I'm going to copy this and come here over to stack blitz. And I believe just by entering the dependency, it's going to install it. And then to use it, I'm going to copy this line, which is create ID from add parallel drive CUID2. I'm going to paste it here. And then I'm going to say the ID will be create ID, and we invoke this function. So now let's test this out. Let's see if it works. This should actually be a form now that I think about it. So form, and then on submit, we get the event, and then we can say event.prevent default, and then we can say add to do, but we must get the data. So we can use this via form data. So I believe we can pass in a name to this, which is going to be to do description. And let's get the form data. So form data is equal to new form data. And we pass in e dot, let me confirm this, form data. So constructor, let's see how this works. So we get the form ID form, and then we must get the elements. So we can say e dot current target, which is going to be the form element. And then I believe that's everything. So let's see if this works. Form data. And for these, do we need to set the type, name, then the value, of course. Although I think that I'm going to use a controlled input just because I want to clear the input. I'm not entirely sure how to clear it this way. Though for this, you could just ask ChatGPT and you get a quick answer. So I'm going to change this up and say const to do input. Use state. This will be to do add description, and initially this will be null. So we can say or null, and then initialize this as null. And then the value of this will be the to do input, and on change, we're simply going to get the value. So new value, and we're going to set to do input to be this new value. So this is going to be react.change event. So this is the event. So event.target.value. And now if I save this, we should be able to see the input here in the input, but also if we render this and I type in something, we get the input. So now upon submission, we can say add to do, and we pass in the to do input, although we could just get rid of this and simply say the description will be the to do input. This way it's more concise. No need to repeat ourselves. And if I save this, we should now see a to do. So I can say do the dishes and then add, and nothing is being rendered. Let's check the console. So we can say console.log, submitted, save, add, and I believe it's because the type is button, not submit. Rookie mistake. So now I can say do the dishes, then add, and now it works. Now we get a warning saying we need to provide an on change. So now we need to have a way to toggle the state of the to do. So we can say checked or unchecked. And now that I see this is being rendered separately. So we can add a simple flex. So style display will be flex, and if I save this, add something, it now looks much better. And I believe the input should go before the content, the description of the to-do. Okay, so now that we have this and this is not getting formatted for some reason, we can now add the logic for checking a to-do. So we can say function toggle to-do, and then we get the ID of the to-do. So to-do ID, this will be to-do add ID, and this is not going to return anything. And what we're simply going to do is say set to-dos. We get the previous to-dos, and then we're going to get the updated ones. So we can actually simplify this and say previous.map. We get each to-do, and then we can say to-do.id is equal to to-do ID. If it is, we can spread over the to-do, and then we can say the completed will be not to-do.completed. So we're toggling it. And then after this, we can simply say keep it as it is. Do not modify it. And then we can come here to the unchange, and simply all we have to do is invoke the add to do or the toggle to do, and we pass in the ID of the to do. So to-do.id, and that's about it. So now if I add something and check it, uncheck it, it works. But let's confirm this by rendering the JSON.stringify. We pass in the to-dos null2, so for formatting. Now if I save this, add something, as we can see completed is false, and then if I check it, it is now true, false, true, false. Now there's something that we can improve, and that is if I click on the description, it should toggle it as well. So for this, all we have to do is change the div to be a label. So it is going to handle this automatically for us. If I add a to do and click here, as we can see, it now triggers the checkbox. So now let me double check what we have to do. Create a new to do. This is completed. Then delete a to do. So let's render a button. Type is equal to button, then X, and then we can create another function. Remove to do. We get the idea of the to do. This is not going to return anything, so let's keep things consistent. And then we're going to say set to dos. We get the previous to dos. And then we can filter them. So dot filter, and we want to say where we want to keep everything except this to do. So we can get each to do, and we can say where the to do.id is different from the one we're passing in. And this is pretty much it. So now if I save this and come here, we can say unclick, and then we can invoke remove to do, and we pass in the to-do.id. And now if I add some to-dos, we're not clearing this input. So let's actually do this. Here on the add to-do, we can say set to-do input to be null. Now if I add some, it is still not clearing it. Okay, so I fixed it, and what I did was simply invoke set to do input to be an empty string. That's it. And I also got rid of this invocation within this function just for separation of concerns. So the onSubmit is going to handle everything it needs to do to add the input and any other side effects, such as clearing the input. Meanwhile, the add to do function should only add a to do, as the function name implies. So now this is much better. So let's revisit this, delete a to do. So now let's see if it works. So if I click on the X, it is going to remove the to do. So now we can get rid of this JSON stringify. Now mark a to do as completed. That's also completed. And that seems to be everything except for searching a specific to do. So for this, we can say const to do search or query, set query, react.useState, and let's keep it null. So this will be either null or of type string. And then here, right after this input, or after this form, we can render a label, search a to-do, then input, type text, then we can close this off and close this label, and then we can say value is equal to query, and then on change, we get the event, and we simply say query or set query, and then we pass in the event.target.value. And now if I save this, now this is bugging me for some reason. StackBlitz is not formatting my document. No matter what I do, there seems to be no way for Prettier to work now. But anyway, so now that we have the set query, we need to add the logic for filtering the to-dos. So what we can do is say const filtered to-dos is equal to, so we derive this state. We can say to-dos.filter, and then we need to move this up as we need to use this beforehand. So we can say where the to-do.description.to lowercase dot includes the query dot to lowercase. And now if I save this and actually replace these to filter to do, so now we're rendering the derived state, we can now type in something, so something, and it changed it to local lowercase, so this is to lowercase, not local. So now we can add it, so one to do. And for some reason, TypeScript in StackBlitz is not working fine. So this should be yelling at me saying, hey, the query can be null, so you cannot call or invoke this method. But for some reason, StackBlitz doesn't want to work with me. So at this point, we're basically losing all of TypeScript support. So for this, we can just use optional chaining. So if the left-hand side exists, then invoke this function, otherwise just return undefined. Now this requires of type string. So I believe this wouldn't work by just doing this, as query must be different from undefined. So we can say, or null. So we can say query is different from null. If it is, then execute this piece of code. Otherwise, simply return each to do. Or actually where this is true. So to-dos.filter, so this is like where. So is the query different from null? If it is, then call this lowercase and then check against the query. Otherwise, just say null so that we keep all of the to-dos in its entirety. So now we can add one to-do, then another to-do, third to-do. And now if I search for add one to-do, this works. What about another to-do? This also works, and a third to-do. So as we can see, this works just fine. Okay, I had to port over the code to my local machine because for some reason StackBlitz wasn't showing any TypeScript errors, nor was Prettier working. So now that I pasted the code here, as we can see, we get 2 errors. So StackBlitz was defeating the purpose of using TypeScript in the first place. So as we can see, I committed this mistake. I'm using this union within the to-do. So this is why I'm getting this error. So this instead should be or null outside. So it can be either the description or null. Now with this, I get more errors. So now we get description can be null. So I cannot set a nullable description to something that is expecting to be of type string. As we can see, type string or null is not assignable to type string. So what we can do is simply use a guard. So we can say if to-do input is equal to null, return right away. So now the error goes away. Now if I scroll down, we get another error. Value type string or null is not assignable to this union. So this is why it wasn't working when I was setting it to null, because null is not a possible value for the input value. So for this, what I'm going to do is actually change this to be undefined. And now we can say is equal to undefined, and then we can initialize it with undefined, or I believe if I do not set anything, well, it's undefined. And now I can come down here and actually change the query as well. So I can say, and I prefer it to be after the actual type we are going to be using, so string or undefined. And now we can say it's different from undefined. And as we can see, all errors went away. So now with this, we completed the challenge. If I come here to my browser, we can add a to-do, then hit enter, and we get this to-do item. We can mark it as completed, and we can get rid of it. Just as we can search for a to-do. So we can say 2, we only get this one. 1, we get this one. What if we add duplicate ones? Type 1, we get the 3. So now, as we can see, we completed the challenge, but there's always room for improvement. Now, the requirements for this small project only included these functionalities. It didn't require showing a counter of how many to-dos there are left, nor is there a way to toggle the different views, so to see all to-dos or only the completed or only the uncompleted. And that's something that I would actually recommend you to try and solve. Try implementing these functionalities, expand from these. But what about the code itself? Is there something we can improve? Well, there is. We can provide a better separation of concerns, and that is we're dumping everything within this app component. We should actually extract at the very least the to-dos we're rendering. So this should be in its own component. Now in an interview, the evaluator might ask you or might even recommend you to refactor something or to expand upon something or to improve something that you wrote. In that case, you could also take the initiative and tell them what you consider to be some areas for improvement. Now for this, I would create a new file. So todo.tsx, then export const todo react.fc, and the props, so type props is equal to to-dos, and then this will be an array of to-do. So at import, for some reason it is not importing the to-do. So to-do from dot slash, then types, and now I see why, and that is because this component is called a to-do, and this type is a to-do, so there's a clash. So for that, I'll rename this to say to-do as to-do type, then to-do type, and then set to-dos react.dispatch, and then set state action, and we pass in the to-do type. And then we can pass this to fc as a generic, and we get access to the to-dos and to set to-dos. And now we can come back here and copy this. And actually, I'll remove this to be a single to-do, so singular, and then return, and I paste this here. Now we're missing these functions, toggle to do and remove to do. So for that, I'll come here and copy this function, paste it here, then rename this to do type, and likewise with the toggle to do. And now we can get rid of this function, get rid of remove to do, remove all of this, and I'm going to rename this to do type just for simplicity in this case, so we can get rid of this as well. And now we can render the to do component. So key to do.id, we pass in the to do and the set to dos, and we should also get rid of this key here. Now if we save this, everything should work as it used to. So we can remove a to do and search for a to do. Now you can improve this further and change the query logic. We're just using lowercase and we're searching if the string contains the other string. But that's just a very basic search implementation. For that, you would usually normalize the string, use the composed form, and remove diacritical marks. But what do all of these concepts mean? Well, for that, I just asked Bing AI. I said when implementing a search functionality, I came across someone suggesting these three. Can you explain why? And as we can see, Normalizing the query string means converting it to a standard or canonical form, such as using lowercase letters, removing punctuation, and trimming white space. Then we have the composed form, means breaking down the characters that have diacritical marks, such as accents, into their base characters and separate marks. For example, the letter E, which has this diacritical mark, can be decomposed into, separately, the E character and this diacritical mark. This can help to handle different languages and the scripts that use diacritical marks. And then we have removing diacritical marks, means deleting the separate marks that are left after the composition, so after this step. So since using the composed form means we're separating these two characters, we're then deleting or removing this extra diacritical mark. So for this, what you would do is not implement that all in your own, because, well, who wants to do this? That's why AIs now exist. So we can come here and we can open the GitHub Copilot chat and we can say, I need to improve my search functionality to implement, and then we can say, normalize the query string, use the composed form, and then remove the diacritical marks. Can you help me write this function and implement it in my code or logic? And then I can add the app.csx file and hit enter. And then it gave us these functions. So normalize and remove diacritics. And then it is going to refactor the filter to do's logic. So let's test this out. I'm going to copy this, paste it here for simplicity, and then copy the filter to do's refactor and paste it here. And now if I hit save, let's see if it works. So I'll come here and I'll create a to-do with a diacritical mark. So to-do, then click on add. And if I search for to-do without the diacritical mark, as we can see, it is working. What about before? So if I come here, add one with a diacritical mark, and then search for to-do, it is not going to work. So do not be afraid to leverage these AI tools. This is not cheating, nor are they going to take your work. This is merely a tool to help you become more productive. Now, what could you do now? Well, extract this function into a utils directory and start making this project scalable. Now, this challenge was assigned to this candidate within the technical interview. So it's not like you have infinite time to polish it and make it as scalable and as performant as possible. Now, would I consider cheating if you used AI to, say, write this function? No, not at all. As I said, it is simply a tool. It is not something that should do your work. Not for now, at least. Sure, it's going to happen in the future, but that's not the case currently. So as long as you don't ask Copilot to write the whole code for the challenge, you're okay. This is basically using Google, but way better. Anyway, I'll leave the second challenge for the next video. I hope you learned a lot, and if you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. I'll see you in the next one.